Welcome to the Solar Investors Guide podcast, brought to you by Photovoltaik magazine and PV Europe. Agri-PV or agrivoltaics is gaining momentum worldwide. It combines photovoltaic power generation with arable land and pastures, allowing both electricity production and food cultivation to benefit directly from each other. The PV modules protect soils and crops from extensive sunlight and heavy rainfall. At the same time, power yields often increase since the modules are better cooled through higher evaporation and improved ventilation. Last week, the Agri-PV sector met in Milan for the Agrivoltaics Industry Forum Europe. There I spoke with Stephan Schindele, a renowned expert in the field. Stephan completed his PhD on Agri-PV at the Fraunhofer ISE and today serves as head of Agri-PV at BayWa RE. But before we jump into the conversation, just a quick favor. If you enjoy this podcast, please hit that subscribe button and maybe leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps us climb the podcast charts and reach more people who are passionate about solar investing. But now, let's turn to Stephan Schindele and the Agrivoltaics Industry Forum Europe. I'm Carsten Schäfer and you're listening to the Solar Investors Guide podcast. Hi Stephan, welcome to the Solar Investors Guide podcast.
Hi Carsten, good to see you again. Thanks for inviting and hosting me.
You're very welcome. You're in Milan at the Agri-Voltaics Industry Forum Europe, so we're getting the very latest news from the event now straight from you. What's the mood like over there?
It's pretty exciting. Actually, it's always good to meet once a year only the Agri people at this European forum. It's a lot of trust building also amongst the different stakeholders. I'm very happy there is quite a lot of farming actors here in the conference, from association, from the politics. Some farmers also made it to Milano. So it's actually really cool to exchange and see what progress has been made in the past year.
And what kind of progress did happen?
Well, actually quite a few utility scale large projects, also smaller projects have gone on grid. So that's really nice. To give you some examples, we had a nice chicken PV project inaugurated by Vattenfall. We have Elysium Solar, who is doing a crop PV in Schönefeld, close to Berlin. So in Germany, there was some progress. We had some really nice projects in France with sheep grazing. We also had the cow PV project that you see in my background with Nestlé. So there is a lot of projects happening all over in Europe. And it's good to see how policymakers, associations also pick up on the topic. And Solar Power Europe, for instance, have published for this conference a policy overview. We see that 18 governments, member states of the European Union have now become active. Some, of course, are front runners and have a very holistic policy regime for Agri-PV. Some have less. But after all, the community is increasing and it's good to see the progress.
Great. You are the brand ambassador for this very event, the Agri-Voltaics Industry Forum Europe. What is your job description as such?
Well, for this year, so every year there is a different person trying to advertise. It's people maybe that are recognized in the sector of the niche of Agri-PV. And I'm very honored that this year it is my responsibility also to promote this event. And I feel privileged that I was asked by Connexio whether I can do this year. Of course, also in this role, we bring in our network, we bring in our experience. We also consult the committee program or the program committee to actually have a nice setup and the scenery for this event there. So it's actually a great privilege.
Great.
To be the ambassador this year.
All right. And how is the Agri-PV sector developing across Europe in general?
Well, maybe in general, let's maybe go even further away globally for the first step.
All right.
So there was a fantastic contribution by the Global Solar Council, and they brought an estimate how much capacity of Agri-PV has been implemented globally. And when we look at the 2.2 terawatt that has been globally installed, it's roughly 4%. 4% translate to about 80, 90 gigawatt. And that's approximately the same installed capacity as all of Germany. So just to get a rough feeling, half of that, so 50% is by far the largest market for Agri-PV is in China, with very large Agri-PV projects. We think of the one with the goji berries in the desert of Goa, and I think it has like 800 megawatt, this single project. So China for sure is a front runner in the Gobi Desert. However, there's also great progress in the United States with the American Solar Grazing Association, ASCA, that promote in particular sheep grazing. But now we also see the first cattle grazing. So not dairy cows, like milk cows, but actually for food, for meat production, the cattle. And they also start grazing under solar panels in the United States. So the ASCA is promoting this idea of grazing with livestock under solar panels to do the greenkeeping. So roughly 10% of the utility scale PV sector in the United States is actually Agri-PV, dual use with shepherds, with farmers, with livestock keepers. So that's a cool progress to see in the United States. We see the first African governments picking up on Agri-PV, which I'm very happy about too, because the potential, the area, the theoretical potential in Africa is just massive, and also the need to adapt to climate change. So we see governments in Nigeria, we see in Kenya projects, we see in Ethiopia. Delegation has just recently been to Korea to actually exchange on Agri-PV. In Korea, remember, there is the Global Green Growth Institute and the Global Green Climate Fund, who is promoting also the finance in going into Agri-PV. The GCF, the Green Climate Fund, also has financed a project on a small island state, Fiji, in the Pacific Ocean there. So whenever land is scarce, whenever farmland is scarce in a certain government, of course, Agri-PV can make sense and is the solution to dual use the land. And we see obviously planetary boundaries. Our planet is scarce, and therefore a lot of governments pick up on that and develop a promotion scheme. And that's not only financially. This has to do with permitting, with grid access, with agriculture subsidy, and so globally it's going really well. And then now maybe we can start to narrow it down to Europe. And obviously in Europe, Italy, France, Germany, Austria, I'd say these are the front runners for Agri-PV in Europe. And in Spain has announced 2 days ago also some good news that the agricultural activity in Agri-PV project is eligible to the CAP subsidy. So that's fantastic news as well. So there is no hindrance from the farming sector to jump in and do farming in solar projects, or vice versa, to actually integrate solar into the farming process. So there will be still no challenge on this issue in Spain anymore, which there was for the past years.
Great. For example, in Germany alone, there's enough land for around 500 gigawatts of Agri-PV. Are there similar estimates available for Europe as a whole, or even for the whole planet?
Yeah, there are. We actually published this in our agrivoltaics book, where we evaluated technical, ecological, economic aspects, also legal aspects. And in chapter 2, to farm or not to farm, we actually made a rough estimate. If we would only use 1% of the utilized agricultural land, how much theoretical potential we would have. And I don't know now the precise number, but for sure, only 1% of the farmland would meet the overall energy transition goals for photovoltaic. Wow. So farmers and the solar industry together could become the energy provider of our society, of our planet, of the future. And this is why this link between farming sector and solar industry is so important, because we want to defossilize. And that means get rid of gas, get rid of oil. You think of industrial heat pumps, of private heat pumps, of electric vehicles. We're going to electrify our society. That means we need much more power production, and the farmers together with the solar industry can actually do that in rural areas. So we can, if we do it smartly, actually promote the farming sector, while at the same time the solar industry together with battery storage is an unbeatable combination, in my opinion. Yeah? So we can be flexible, we have grid security, we have promotion of rural areas. So it's a big chance. There is a lot of investments, and the more projects we see, the more experienced we become. Not just we as a solar sector, but also the financing institution, also the farmers, and the more you see it, the more you can touch it, and the more the people will like it. And this creates trust in the sector, and that's diminishing then the risk, because we do learning with each project being built. And these conferences are just so great because we exchange not just on the good stuff, we also obviously talk about the bad stuff, and then how to mitigate that and how to improve our solutions for the future.
Yeah, yeah. You already mentioned Spain, where the agrivoltaics projects are now eligible for the EU farm subsidy program. Is that a game changer for solar energy in Spain?
Well, it's a game changer for the farmers and the landowners to say, okay, I contribute my land to the development of agri-solar, because if the zoning would have been different, if the dominant land use would not be farming anymore, you would transition the land into industrial area, settlement increase for the purpose of solely electricity production. And obviously then there is a whole other impacts that this has on the farm. Yeah? For instance, if the status of farmland is lost, the tax evaluation from the fiscal authorities is done differently. And that means it's not just the agricultural subsidy that is lost, it's also the tax impact that you have on the farm. When you, for instance, inherit the land to your ancestor or to someone else that wants to take over the farm, then obviously there is a tax issue. And if the status of farmland remains farmland, then the information that agricultural subsidy can be still available if you do good agricultural, environmental friendly agricultural activity, farming activity, then that's a positive sign for the farming sector. And for us, as the solar sector is always in the need to look for good spots and good areas, of course, we have been limited to go on very fruitful and good soils, because this was provided for food production. And if we now say in dual use, we don't compete with food production. Actually, we can increase the area potential where we can execute projects. And very importantly, we can become closer to the grid access. Because, also grid is becoming scarce, and the more area potential you have, the better availability you have actually to bring the project closer to the grid, reduce the cost. And that is a great advantage of Agri-PV, that there is no competition on the land use, and therefore we have less grid installation costs there often. Yeah. So where we would maybe have limits with other renewable energy sources.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. In its new EU farming strategy from February, the EU put agri-solar at the core of its agricultural policy. What does this mean in practice, and are you already noticing any effects?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a path. I think already years back we went on this path where we say, if we are in a multiple crisis, a poly crisis, we cannot just think in our own boxes. Mm-hmm. We have to really think of solutions that go interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, meaning from policymakers, researchers, industry, society, like community engagement, while at the same time having the agricultural, environmental, and energy sector collaborating. And so we have to have multifunctional land use to solve this poly crisis. And then it was clear that Agri-PV is such a solution. It's not the only solution. Think of agroforestry, for instance, or regenerative agricultural practices, which are more contributing to sustainable farming. The challenge that the farmer has when they go also through the farming transition, they need to invest too. Mm-hmm. So they need to invest into new machinery. If you want to have agroforestry, you have to grow a tree for 10 years without harvesting or without having the benefit of the shades and the wind protection there. So all of this is an investment. With Agri-PV, we're just so much faster, because once we have a ready-to-build project and once we have, let's say, a land lease payment being made, this can maybe take between 2 and 4 years to the farmer, which is much faster and much more economic income diversification compared to an agroforestry or region ag transition. So that's what we call the beyond strategy. So yes, a farmer dedicates maybe 10 to 20% of the farmland for an Agri-PV project, but the impact can be on 100% of the farmland. And this perceived dip at the beginning where the farmer needs to make an investment, so in the long run he actually has a benefit, this can be closed by an Agri-PV project. So there is no dip anymore. There is only benefits. And this is, I think, also why policymakers realized if we enable energy development in rural areas and we combine it smartly again with the agricultural policy goals, we actually have a mutual benefit, and we can achieve our sustainable farming faster and more effective and efficiently if we combine it with Agri-PV.
Mm-hmm. But this EU farming strategy, how does it support agrivoltaics in concrete ways?
Yeah, so there is, let's say, a target picture. That's the Green Deal, right? We want to be the first continent who is climate neutral, hopefully one day climate positive, right? Historically also, the European Union. And the agriculture strategy for the Green Deal is the so-called farm to fork strategy. Mm-hmm. And that is, let's say, the road from really where the food is produced on the farm level to the logistics and processing of that food, going then again into logistics into the food retailer, and then to the final customers, all of us who eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, the food, right? And the responsibility is to have a more efficient and effective food chain, so from the farm to the fork. So the responsibility is everywhere along this chain. Yet the farmer, if we want to be climate neutral, also has to have a low emission farming process one day. So also the farmer has to transition towards low emission production schemes. That's for the food retailers and the food processors, often the so-called scope 3 emissions. And the strategy is aiming also that the farmer, of course, if we don't waste food, that's great, because then we have a lower impact on CO2 emissions, right? If we have less waste, but also less rotten products and not throwing so much food away because overconsumption and so on. At the end, when we really break it down to the farm level, they need to go to a low emission production scheme. And this is also where they have to electrify. We think of electric ventilation, electric generators rather than diesel generators, electric machinery, robotics in farming. So there is a demand for farmers to electrify, sourcing green electricity. Of course, many farmers are doing this already with rooftop PV, sometimes windmills, sometimes biogas. So here, Agri-PV is another piece of the puzzle. It's another opportunity for the farmers to actually electrify first the farm. And then, as the area that they are farming on is so much larger, actually, they can also the excess energy supply to the grid together with the project developers, the PPA off-takers and so on. So there is brilliant opportunities to support the farming sector to become low emission. That's the strategy. But from a farming sector, also you want to make sure that the food, which is the core business of the farmer, is also not violating against any agriculture regulation. So it must be clear that the agriculture policy and the subsidy scheme is still available for the food process, even though we produce electricity on the same land. And this is why Spain, Germany, France, Italy, why they all said, okay, the dual use with Agri-PV is eligible to the agriculture subsidy. This is really what the European institutions, the DG Agri, who is in charge of the EU CAP, they clearly state, as long as the farming practice is in good and environmental practice, there is no issue. It's the member states who hinder it. It's not the EU Commission who is hindering it. And the member states are often too slow. There is 27 member states now, and sometimes are forerunner and some just don't move because maybe they have a different agenda for the time being, which is also fine. But at one stage, all member states hopefully move towards appreciating that Agri-PV dual use of land is possible. Other institutions lag, in my opinion, behind when we talk about investment. For instance, the European Investment Bank, they do programs and funds where they have, like multi-million and billion funds to promote a certain scheme. And in my opinion, dual use of land could benefit if the cost of capital could be reduced by giving maybe 25 to 50 basis points of the interest, a security from the European Investment Bank to the private banks who finance our investments. If that would be available, the capital cost would be further decreased, and therefore the promotion of Agri-PV accelerated. But these schemes are missing. When we think to Germany, the Rentenbank, which is the farmers' bank of the once they retire and so on, they have such a subsidy scheme. So if a farmer invests into Agri-PV, he or she gets 25 basis points reduction on the interest rate when they invest into and need debt capital for the investment there. And that scheme, I think, is wonderful, and it could be promoted to the European Investment Bank and not only limited to farmers investors, but actually to any investment that goes into the Agri-PV field. So yes, there is still improvements to be made. And other suggestions that we had discussed with the European DG Agri is farmers in Europe are able to voluntarily set aside arable land for biodiversity reasons. And if we were able to actually implement eco-PV projects where not a productive agricultural activity is in the focus, but a non-productive, meaning eco services, biodiversity increase, soil improvement, carbon farming, so we can actually monitor, report, and verify MRV that we can increase biodiversity and improve soil quality, which is very important. If that would be eligible to be done on voluntarily set aside area, there would be no need for additional loss of land for the Agri-PV or PV rollout. So this is just another variety, because at the moment a lot of member states focus only on the productive agricultural activity, meaning they set targets like in Germany, 66% of the agricultural yield must be still available after the installation of the project. In Italy, it's 80%. In France, it's 90%. So that's only focusing on biomass production, not focusing on biodiversity, soil improvement, and so on. But we can also do that. And farmer is not just doing food production. They also do landscape caring and biodiversity measures. That's called non-productive farming activity. And this is also eligible to subsidies, but not in an eco-PV project. Yes, because there is limits. How long are you able to set aside area? At the moment, it's only a part of a crop rotation scheme, so 30 years, which is the duration of our project here. I think it would be necessary that temporary means when it combined with an eco-PV system, actually 30 years and not only 4 years. So it's just a time limitation that needs to be changed in these schemes. Yeah.
All right. Talking about politics, I guess the conference, the agrivoltaics conference, is in Italy because the country offers favorable conditions for agri-solar. What are the concrete benefits there, and is Italy really leading the way in the EU?
I think in the past 2 years, Italy was leading the way, simply because they had from the Corona Recovery Act, they were benefiting from a contribution from the European Commission with back then Minister Draghi, who was enabled to have 1.8 billion euros to promote into agri-solar projects. Out of this 1.8 billion euros, 700 million went into rooftop, particularly on farms, so to promote PV installations on rooftops on farm buildings. And the other 1.1 billion euros was invested into Agri-PV, so-called advanced Agri-PV. And there is great associations in Italy who managed also to consult the policies in such way that there is a clear definition of what do you need to do in Agri-PV projects in order to be eligible to that funding scheme. And then the sector was able to actually develop in a very fast time quite an amount of Agri-PV project. I think it translates nearly to 1 gigawatt. So a lot of developers picked up on that support scheme. The support scheme is now finished. 2 auctions have taken place. So we know that many projects will come, and some already early movers already have started the construction of these projects. However, the funding at the moment is not extended. So now in future also Agri-PV will compete with conventional ground-mounted schemes in Italy. Also, in my opinion, that's a good movement because at the end, Agri-PV, the potential is not just on area, it's also about cost. So what's the cost potential? And of course, there's a difference if you develop a cow PV project or fruit PV projects above apple trees with light transparent panels and 4 meter height rather than only 2 meter height with a full panel, right? On pasture land. And if you think of grazing PV sheep, which was done also in the past decade already, when even the term Agri-PV was not there, still it was fantastic projects with shepherds. These are actually very cost competitive with ground mounted already. So at the end, we need to look for ways where we can involve the farmers at a low cost, nearly and at the same cost level as ground-mounted, conventional ground-mounted PV systems. On the other hand, there is sectors, agricultural sectors who would also participate in Agri-PV. As I mentioned, the special crops, for instance, vine cultivators all over in Europe, no matter whether this is Italy, France, or Spain. Here they also have to elevate the panels and therefore have higher cost. And in my opinion, the cost of Agri-PV should never exceed the cost for industrial rooftop PV installations, because also these spaces we want to use, right? And if you have large roofs, everyone is asking, hey, why don't we put PV on these large roofs? Yeah? To have such a megawatt plant on a rooftop, you cannot self-consume all of this electricity. So you also have access, and the access you need to finance somehow. Yeah? So there is a support scheme for these kind of rooftop PV. And if Agri-PV is amongst this cost level between ground-mounted and large rooftop, then I think it's fair to also promote it, Agri-PV, financially with the energy schemes, but also in terms of agricultural tax law, everything that I had mentioned before.
All right.
And in Italy, it's possible now to go on farmland. In Italy, they have actually also in the permitting law, which is important, they said, look, we have suitable areas where you can continue developing ground-mounted photovoltaic. This is, for instance, 300 meters in the surrounding of industrial area, or 300 meter buffer zone along traffic infrastructure, or 300 meters around substations for the grid access and so on. So that's good. We can continue with ground mounted, but on a very limited area potential. Whenever you are not in the suitable area and you are outside the suitable area, basically you're on farmland, and then you must continue with Agri-PV. And so the Agri-PV potential is higher than the ground-mounted potential because of this permitting regulation. And now some continue to do ground-mounted in suitable area, and some continue with Agri-PV on non-suitable area. Like us, also we as BayWa, we are now still doing both, but on the long run, for sure, the area potential for Agri-PV is larger, because the suitable area will every year be reduced. And then on the long run, we will see more Agri-PV projects in Italy.
Just very briefly, so you still think Italy is leading the way in the EU or not?
No, I think they have been overtaken, which is a really fantastic race, in my opinion. Which member state is doing the most Agri-PV projects? I think we have such a race. And I think France is now the leader in the next 2 years. So Italy, maybe from the year 23 until 25, 26, and from 25 till 28, I'm pretty sure France will take the lead in agrivoltaics. They also, from the permitting regulation, said the ground cover ratio of PV projects on farmland should not be higher than 40%. That means we have to extend the space between our PV rows. That means, again, that tracker solutions become more attractive, because if you have a certain spacing to keep, then you want to still optimize the production, and then tracker schemes are more attractive. And that again fits really nicely to Agri-PV projects, because you can move the trackers into Agri modes and then have wide spaces for the machinery to pass through and so on there. So we see a lot of Agri-PV projects being developed in France, not just from BayWa, but from the entire sector. And I think also Germany will actually play a very crucial role. Hopefully soon there will be a solution between the DG competition in Europe and the German on the Solar Paket 1, right? Which is still not officially passing through. So I'm also curious how the German government is now actually positioning themselves towards Agri-PV, and whether there will be any changes to the Solar Paket and the feed-in tariff schemes there. But yeah, I think Italy and France are still the leaders in the next 3 to 4 years.
All right. And which countries are lagging behind in Agri-PV, and what needs to be done there in Europe?
Yeah, I think in Europe, when you look towards East Germany, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, they are very large agricultural producers. They have fantastic, innovative farmers, large farms that would actually fit really nicely to Agri-PV. Poland also has a lot of special cultures. You think of berry and apple. They are the largest special culture providers in Europe, besides Spain, for instance. So I think East Europe has a lot of potential. I'm happy that, for instance, the Czech Republic has promoted Agri-PV, first on true PV. Now they also go towards pasture land and arable land. So we see the movement from Central Europe, let's say Germany, France, Italy, going towards the east. Also Croatia is promoting Agri-PV. But the large area potential like Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, I see a lot of policy potential improvements to be made. And what they can do, actually, they can just look into the Agri-Solar policy guideline from Solar Power Europe and dig, exchange with other member states. Until recently, only 4 member states have introduced Agri-PV explicitly in their national agricultural strategy plan. All member states have to submit a national strategy plan for energy, but also for agriculture. And in the best way, of course, the national plans for energy and the national plan for agriculture are actually talking to each other, but often they don't.
And which 4 countries are those?
I think basically it was the ones that I just mentioned.
The front runners.
France, Germany, Italy, and I think Austria.
Yeah. All right.
Austria, we saw some wonderful projects, right? In the Burgenland energy, Wien energy, Püsbock energy. It's like really EWS Sonnenfeld. We saw so many fantastic Agri-PV projects in Austria. It's like I'm sometimes a little jealous, that so many wonderful projects. I wish we would have more and faster as well. But obviously, the sector is delivering. It's not just BayWa. It's the sector is much bigger, and there's many great Agri-PV projects now rolling out.
Great. Stephan, the last time we spoke, you said that only Agri-PV installations would be allowed on open land in France. Doesn't that hinder the expansion of solar energy as a whole on open land, ground-mounted PV installations?
So it is true that some governments limit the diffusion of ground-mounted photovoltaics of farmland because of the food supply difficulties if you take away farmland from the production, let's say. I don't think that it is a good idea to stop the diffusion of ground mounted immediately without having tested the rollout of Agri-PV, because it's still learning. The landowners, the farmers, we as a sector, we have to adapt to policy regimes, and I think it's fair that soil is protected, because fruitful living soil is something very scarce on the planet Earth. So yes, it's fair to protect it. It's even ethically needed. So I think it's good that some is being more restricted and some is more than opened, but it has to be a transition phase. It cannot go from one day to the other. And I think this is often then the issue when policymakers don't phase out and increase the other, but just say, stop here, go here. And then the sector is shocked, let's say. And I think this is something that happened in Italy and in France, where the sector was kind of overwhelmed. But the speed of learning is accelerating, and I think we are adapting. Adapting also means often the cost increase. Obviously, there is no lower cost implementation of solar than utility scale ground-mounted conventional PV without nothing, which is still fair, maybe in a desert region, but not so fair if it's on fruitful soil. So if we want to do Agri-PV, there is a slight cost increase because of the complexity and the dual use. There's also cost advantages at the end. We have to see what is the co-benefits that are resulting out of Agri-PV. And these are clearly that we keep the food production stable. It's clearly that we make the farmer more resilient, ecological and economically. It's clearly that the combined solution has a higher social acceptance. So also we have to consider that the acceptance of renewable energy is not everywhere they scream hooray if projects are being developed here. So overall, I think Agri-PV has its advantages, and we should not only focus on cost, but on the more macroeconomic effects that this has.
All right. Apart from the EU farming strategy, are there efforts to create uniform conditions and standardization for Agri-PV in the EU?
Yeah, this was discussed heavily yesterday in an afternoon session, whether this is needed or not needed. At the end, on national level, everyone screams for it and says we need a clear standard, a clear definition. So that's reducing ambiguity for policymakers, and then it's clear how we can differentiate between ground-mounted and Agri-PV. And we see all these standards on national level. It's just for us as a company, it's really difficult if in each member state we have to use a different technology, because then we don't have the economies of scale. We cannot, one solution fits it all. Of course, every project is different, but if every standard is different, it's really making the things very complicated, with the suppliers, and all these to adapt to all these regulations. So I think it would be beneficial to have a European-wide standard. I know that in Germany there is a norming process ongoing, and every member state has a norming organization. And as soon as another member state will also initiate a norming process, then they have to be merged. So this ultimately leads to a European standard. These are very long processes. We talk about 3 to 5 years, and at the end, it's a norm is done on a consensus, not on a majority vote or something. And a consensus really means that this must be a standard that the agricultural, environmental, and solar sector agrees upon together. So I hope that it will be a standard that is very much aligned with the agricultural subsidy scheme, because if a farmer is doing good farming practice in an Agri-PV project, then I think that's Agri-PV. And there's basically all the rules are already there. And what we sometimes do, we do it overcomplicated. And make 2 additional reporting schemes. So the farmers have to report to the agriculture subsidy and has to report to the grid operator, like it is in Germany, just to say, look, I did 66% of the food compared. And who should evaluate that? Who should control that? Who should punish that? It's just, this is based on a mistrust where we want to avoid pseudo Agri-PV and not good Agri-PV. But I don't see why there should be so much mistrust. I see the projects that are coming out. We wouldn't have any project if there would be no happy farmer. So the farmers contribute. There is the permitting side where we have to involve the local community and get a permit for that, and the okay from the local community. And we get it. Otherwise, we don't have a permit, right? Yeah. So I think there can be more trust. There can be more beautiful projects being shown. I think we have to involve much more the agricultural sector, because especially the agricultural associations, they are the ones who ask for a very high standard. And I understand that we need to have security and reduce ambiguity. However, I think we shouldn't be too strict and have more trust. And maybe the farming association can organize tours, to best practice projects. And whenever there is an Agri-PV project that is kind of fake, well, then, let's look at it and see what was done wrong and improve in future and announce it and don't hide it. So it's okay to make mistakes, but then we have to make the learnings out of that. But I think it's wrong to start with a high bureaucratic hurdle to say, look, only if we keep those 10 KPIs, we can talk about Agri-PV. I think it should be maybe more 2 or 3.
Yeah. A little more flexibility. Yeah, you're right. You yourself see Agri-PV as inherently linked to a transformation of agriculture. Is this a consensus across the EU? What do you think?
I don't think it's a consensus yet. I don't even think that many people know that this could be linked. So it's more communication issue. And again, I think we as BayWa, we have been one of the first ones who actually publish on that, on how regenerative agriculture and sustainable farming practice could be linked to the rollout of Agri-PV. This was the study we published together with Boston Consulting Group. And we see that the farming sector, our customer, Nestlé, for instance, they have very ambitious goals for regenerative agriculture in their supply chain, because they depend on supply security. Only if we have sustainable farming practice, we will have food in future. And just to continue like this won't work. So we have to transition. The transition will come. And this transition is an investment that the agricultural industry goes through. And the investment can also come from the energy sector. Because if we lease the land for our renewable energy projects, I don't just talk about Agri-PV, I also talk about wind onshore. These investments can bring economic increases to the farms. And then we have to make sure that this money is smart, usually to modernize the farm and to transition to sustainable practice. Often we see organic farmers who are very open to that, to actually invest into new schemes. Often we see larger farms who are fully aware if they want to be an attractive customer or supplier to the food industry, they have to transition. So they're aware and they need to invest, and they are happy then to dedicate land to the renewable energy sector, so to get financial support. And this is why I very much look forward to the Agri-Technica or the Eurotier exhibitions that take place in Hanover, Agri-Technica in a few weeks from now, because this is where the farmer sector is, and this is where the ag machinery provider is, and all of these actors, we have to work together to promote this idea of linking the agricultural transition with the energy transition, and how we can do this in the most cost-efficient way and in the most harmonized way also. And there's a lot of innovation, by the way. Also, it's from this sharing networks, sharing thoughts, and sharing investments, a lot of new innovation is coming out. The farming sector, for instance, is missing and suffering from the wage restrictions, the minimum wages that they need to pay, or simply from limited migrations. I mean, they depend on low-cost labor in the farming sector to keep the cost of their production low. Now this cost is increasing, or sometimes these labor forces are simply not available anymore. And they have to also pay for the logistics and for the housing and so on. But think of electrified agricultural robotics. It's not that I'm, looking into science fiction movies too much in future. It's actually happening now. These robotics are electrified, and they will take over a certain role in farming in future. And they do this in a more environmental friendly way and in a more sustainable way. Also economically, it's of beneficial. But of course, again, someone needs to invest into these robotics. And they do precision farming. They do, when we think of our PV rows, that it's just 2 centimeters precise, they can go along. Yeah? And I think if we design the projects smartly, also the agricultural equipment can be combined in the project. That is reducing our risk because there will be less coalition. There will be less drive-throughs maybe if we have smart technology applied. And this is why an exchange on these exhibitions like Agri-Technica is very important.
Yeah, it is. Stephan, in which countries do you personally already build Agri-PV installations? And what was special about those projects and places?
So we've built as BayWa in 8 different countries projects. Every Agri-PV project is really special. I think we are also the first company who has all 5 Agri-PV specifications built, meaning we have with berries and apple in the special culture sector. We also have with wine projects ongoing in France. We have built Agri-PV projects with cereal production in Austria in the project Pöchlan. Also in Spain, the first subsidy-free project in Europe with a PPA from Velux, the window company, a 5 megawatt project there where we have oat production, organic oat production between the rows. All of these projects, like the cow PV project with Nestlé, where the organic farmer is building a stable at the same time, and the cows can freely decide when they want to be in the stable or under the solar panels. It's just wonderful how these different projects come. We have a chicken PV project with our customer RWA in Austria, where chickens do not the grazing, but at least they have the safe space under the panels. We have sheep grazing. So actually we've done it all. We've done it smaller scale and very large scale. We see that actually our internal employees are excited about it. The project developers, it's fun for them to collaborate with a local farmer. The projects are much more locally attached to the community. If you not just get the green electricity, but still the eggs or the milk from that side. So also the local community appreciates that this is still available. And I hope it will be many more markets in future, and not just from BayWa, but from the entire sector.
I mean, Europe is large, and there are significant geographical differences, as you described. But in which countries do you think is Agri-PV already worthwhile today, and where is special government support still needed?
So it is basically possible in most European member states. If you if you do it subsidy free or if you do it in the auction scheme for ground mounted. We can do Agri-PV in Germany, in France, in Spain. We've done it, right? So it's not possible in the Netherlands at the moment. Just to give a bad example, on the permitting law, they made this permitting ladder, as it is called. So in the Netherlands, the local authorities first have to make use of all the PV potential on rooftops. And if all the rooftop potential is used, then we can go on car parks and on artificial lakes like floating and car park PV. And if all of these potential are used, then we can go on farmland, but on farmland only with Agri-PV. And so it's very strict to get a permit and also grid access in the Netherlands. And we think Agri-PV could be accelerated, but there is no definition of Agri-PV in the Netherlands. So at the moment, Holland Solar, together with the farming associations in the Netherlands, they are actually working together to find such a definition. Once that is there, hopefully the policymakers again will develop Agri-PV projects on farmland in the Netherlands. I think that incentives and also non-financial incentives like permitting regulations, innovation regulation when it's about grid access are very important to the sectors. And I also urge policymakers to give a longer term security in the sense of don't change the policy every 2 years, because until really it trickled down for everyone, to the authorities, to the sector, to the farmers, it takes 2 or 3 years. And if it's changed too often, then this is insecurity and this is not good. Then we have to adapt our projects. We have to open the permits again to adapt to the updated policies, and it's just creating a big mess. So I think stability is important to have clear pathways, clear strategies on a national level. But I think the European strategies are quite clear on that. So the member states will need to react. I think only this week also the soil strategy and the soil monitoring has been introduced by the European Commission. So it's clear that we have to put soil management in the center of our work. We forget this far too often. It's not something that we should underappreciate food production. This is very important to the entire society.
You're right. Looking at the investment side, what types of investments dominate in which countries? In which places do farmers tend to invest themselves, and where are institutional investors more active?
Mm-hmm. So in the utility PV scale, let's say multi-megawatt, it's the institutional investors who play the key role because a single farmer often cannot afford to do such a multi-million investment. So here it is clearly the institutional investors and the project developers, the IPPs that will provide a land lease to the landowners and integrate the farmer with a service agreement into the project. So there is multiple benefits for the landowner and the farmer. Of course, the highest economic benefit is if the farmer is also the landowner. There is only little markets where there is a promotion scheme for small Agri-PV projects, like in Germany, where in particular farmers can invest into Agri-PV. Here in Germany, it's a privilege on the permit side for the 2.5 hectares, and then a special bonus on the tariff for a maximum size of 1 megawatt. So you fit 1 megawatt Agri-PV on 2.5 hectares, and you have a fast permitting, and you have a financially attractive benefit for the farmers. So we see also a lot of demand. This is from BayWa more the solar trade business. So the trade business, not the project development business, who picks up on that market segment. We can also offer solutions to that, but we don't see this in other markets that takes place, because when, for instance, in Italy, you can go into the auction also from 1 megawatt onwards, but the 1 megawatt cannot compete with a 20 megawatt project on price. So it's kind of a failed policy design, let's say. So I think that should be separate. I think it's important that both markets are there, small scale where the farmer is an investor, larger scale where institutional investors step in. And in all these projects, it's clear that the development has to be on an eye level, meaning that the farmer together with the solar industry has to find a mutual agreement, a collaboration agreement where everyone is at the end happy and saying, look, these are my conditions. It has to be transparent. Everyone needs to make a profit out of these projects. That's also clear. And once such a collaboration agreement is found and the project is executed, then you are stuck with each other in the best times for 30 years. Yeah? So if it goes well. So I think also institutional investors, they have a responsibility to have a good relation with the operational services who are collaborating with the farmer on a daily basis in case something goes wrong for the greenkeeping and so on.
And is there generally enough interest from investors in investing in Agri-PV?
Yes, thanks for that question. I mean, when you think of a go-to-market strategy for any project, we need to think how can we optimize the power yield. And it seems that Agri-PV had a slight advantage over the past years as tracker solutions, single-axis tracker, 1P or 2P, have higher offtake prices at the moment because of price cannibalization, negative prices in Germany, but also elsewhere in the markets where the PV price is under high pressure. So Agri-PV, where we have a lot of projects developed with a 2P tracker, actually have a higher percentage offtake price. And obviously that's good as the revenues are optimized and in relation to the cost have a higher profitability, these projects at the moment, compared to a fixed hilt south-orientated systems. And obviously, if you were a developer and you did not develop any Agri-PV but only ground-mounted, then maybe you're now stuck with these assets that you have because other Agri-PV projects with trackers have a better offtake price. So I think there is a high interest for tracker projects. Agri-PV projects are often tracker projects, so that's an advantage. And of course, the ESG regulations for sustainable finance, all the co-benefits that come along with Agri-PV is also beneficial for the investors to also fulfill the standards that they have to meet. So overall, I think Agri-PV is attractive to investors. We see demand and the projects that we have that we are able to sell. So yes, I think it is a good thing. In future, for sure, we also have to talk about co-location with the green battery storage, as also Agri-PV is a generator and we have to buffer the negative prices, and we have to buffer when maybe electricity prices are too low, and maybe we then store it and sell it to a higher price later. So I guess also in the business development for Agri-PV, there's no way around to get flexibility, grid stability and battery storage therefore.
Yeah. Stephan, thank you very much for these interesting insights into Agri-PV directly from the Agrivoltaics Industry Forum in Milan. And thank you for being on the Solar Investors Guide podcast.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope we meet at the Agritechnica and discuss many more opportunities with the farmers in close future. Yeah. So thanks for hosting and then interviewing me. Looking forward to meet you in person.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Stephan.
Thanks, Carsten. Ciao.
Ciao. That's it for today's episode of the Solar Investors Guide podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. But even if you didn't, we'd still love to hear from you. Send us your feedback, whether it's praise, criticism, topic ideas, or questions. We really appreciate it all. You can reach me directly at schäfer@photovoltaik.eu. And if you don't want to miss any of our updates for solar investors, make sure to sign up for our newsletter at pveurope.eu/investors. You'll also find the link and everything else we talked about in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in and see you next time.